Hey everyone, welcome back to Minute 60. Tonight I've got one terrifying true story called Someone's Outside, a chilling encounter that will keep you looking over your shoulder. So grab a blanket, dim the lights, and settle in, because once we start, you'll want to keep listening all the way through. If you're new here, this is the channel where we share creepy, true, scary stories that are perfect for late nights and sleepless hours. Before we dive in, I want to know, where are you listening from tonight? Drop your state, city, or even your country in the comments. It's always awesome to see this creepy little community stretch across the US and the world. And hey, if you love scary stories, make sure you hit subscribe and tap the bell, because we've got new nightmares for you every single day. All right, let's get into it. This actually happened to my friend Alex. It was a Thursday night in late September, and he had just gotten home from work. The house smelled faintly of leftover spaghetti he had heated for dinner, mixed with the citrus scent of dish soap from cleaning the dishes earlier. He kicked off his shoes, dropped his keys on the counter, and took a deep breath, letting the familiar smells settle around him like a comfort blanket. He stretched on the couch, pulling a thick blanket over his shoulders. The room was dimly lit, the muted TV flickering silently, and the hum of the refrigerator filled the background. Alex felt a rare moment of peace wash over him. Just him, the quiet, and the ordinary comfort of home. The thought of nothing unusual happening tonight made him relax, though a tiny part of him still felt that faint, unplaceable sense that things might not be as they seemed. He picked up his phone and began scrolling lazily, the screen illuminating his face. The sound of the heater kicking on added another layer of ordinary white noise, and he sipped his tea, enjoying the warmth against his hands. The steam rose in soft swirls, carrying the faint scent of mint from the tea bag. Everything was so normal that it almost felt fragile, like a bubble waiting to burst. Even as he settled, his mind wandered briefly to the yard outside. Nothing was out of place, just the dark, familiar outlines of trees and the fence. But the awareness was subtle, like a shadow in the corner of your vision you can't quite identify. He shook it off, trying to focus on the comfort of the room and the familiar glow of the TV. Then, just as he was about to relax completely, a faint sound reached his ears. Soft, almost imperceptible. His heart skipped a beat. He froze, mug halfway to his lips, straining to listen. It was gone in an instant, but the whisper of unease lingered. He told himself it was nothing, just the wind. But for the first time that evening, the ordinary quiet felt slightly fragile. Finally, Alex leaned back, hugging the blanket tighter, trying to ground himself. He glanced at the TV, at his phone, at the ordinary walls of his home, convincing himself that nothing was wrong. And yet a small, gnawing feeling lingered, the first seed of tension that would grow as the night went on. The house had a stillness you only notice when you're completely alone. No footsteps upstairs, no cars on the street, no voices drifting in from neighbors' windows, just Alex, the muted TV, and the low hum of appliances. He sipped his tea again, relishing the warmth in his hands, letting it ground him in the ordinary calm. Outside, the wind stirred the trees, rustling branches against the siding. At first, Alex barely noticed. It sounded like normal nighttime noise. But as minutes passed, he became aware of patterns, tiny inconsistencies in the sounds that made him pause. The familiar hum of the house felt distant now, almost like a background to the life outside he couldn't see. He wrapped the blanket more tightly around his shoulders, feeling the soft fabric against his skin. His eyes drifted repeatedly to the curtains, thick and closed, hiding the yard from view. He found himself imagining shapes beyond the glass, and even as he tried to rationalize it, a shiver ran down his spine. The ordinary comfort of home felt suddenly delicate, almost like a thin membrane between him and the unknown. Alex tried to distract himself by scrolling through his phone again. But every notification, every flicker of light, drew his attention back to the window. The quiet was too complete, the stillness outside almost unnatural. He realized he was listening too closely now, waiting for sounds he might not hear under normal circumstances. Then he heard it, a faint, irregular scraping on gravel near the porch. His heart skipped a beat, and he froze in place. Probably nothing, he whispered to himself, but the words felt hollow. Something subtle, deliberate, and just out of sight was beginning to pull at his attention. Finally, Alex put down his phone, setting it aside as he focused entirely on listening. Every small noise, a creak, a rustle, a distant thump, registered like a deliberate signal. He hugged the blanket tighter, his mind racing with possibilities, though he tried to tell himself it was nothing more than normal nighttime sounds. Still, the tension had begun to creep in, and the house no longer felt entirely safe. Then Alex saw it. Or at least he thought he did. At the very edge of the curtain, a shadow flickered just for a fraction of a second. His heart skipped, and he froze mid-sip, mug in hand. Outside, a faint crunch of gravel sounded somewhere in the yard, soft and irregular, unlike anything he had noticed before. He swiveled his head toward the door and windows, straining to see, but there was nothing, no figure, no cat, no object that could explain the fleeting movement. He tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a branch swaying in the wind. Maybe a stray cat had wandered by. He whispered to himself, "It's nothing. Calm down." But the unease didn't fade. It coiled tighter in his stomach. Every instinct in his body screamed that something was off, though he couldn't yet identify what. Alex set the mug down, leaning slightly forward, eyes fixed on the window. The shadows outside seemed darker than usual, stretching and warping with the faint light from the street lamp beyond the yard. The muted TV flicker and hum of the refrigerator faded into the background, and the quiet outside felt almost deliberate, like the night itself was holding its breath. He could feel the tension in his own body building. Muscles tight, fingers gripping the blanket. Every tiny sound from the yard, a creak, a rustle, a distant thump, felt amplified. His mind tried to reason, but the imagination fills the gaps in the dark, and every movement he imagined outside seemed deliberate, patient, and impossible to ignore. Alex's eyes scanned the room, trying to find distraction. The TV, his phone, anything. But every glance toward the window brought him back to the uncertainty. The ordinary comfort of the living room felt fragile now, like it could collapse at any moment. Finally he whispered under his breath, "I just need to calm down." But the words had no effect. The quiet house no longer felt safe. Something was out there, just beyond the curtain, and the thought alone made his chest tighten with anticipation and fear. Alex tried to distract himself by scrolling his phone again, but his eyes kept darting back to the window. The curtains seemed heavier tonight, their folds deeper and shadows darker. Something at the edge of his vision flickered again, but when he looked directly, there was nothing. He considered pulling them back, a quick peek, but a small, rational voice in his head warned him. "What if someone sees you?" He froze, blanket pulled tight around his shoulders, heart racing faster with each second. The muted TV flicker cast long, distorted shadows across the walls, making the room feel alive in an eerie way. Even the familiar hum of the refrigerator sounded intrusive, like it had its own weight, pressing into the tense silence. Alex leaned slightly forward, pressing his hands into the blanket, as if it could somehow shield him. Outside, the faint creak of the porch, a subtle shift in the gravel, or a rustle of leaves all registered like deliberate actions, rather than random nighttime noises. His mind ran through every possible scenario, a neighbor, a stray animal, a prankster, but none of it fit the feeling that something deliberate was out there. He tried to steady his breathing, taking slow, shallow breaths to calm the tension in his chest. But every rustle, every faint shadow seemed timed just right, almost like the night itself was playing a game with him. Even the ordinary comfort of his blanket and mug couldn't erase the sensation that he was being watched. Alex finally set down his phone entirely, focusing all his attention on listening. The wind, the branches, even the faint hum of the fridge seemed to pulse in sync with the growing awareness in his mind. He was not alone in the yard. Something, or someone, was testing the boundaries of his sanctuary, patiently waiting for him to notice. By the time he pulled the blanket closer around himself and lowered his gaze, the tension had settled into a low, persistent hum at the back of his mind. He knew the night had just begun, and that ordinary evenings, the ones he trusted, could change in an instant. Alex woke up later than usual that night, still tense from the subtle unease of the previous evening. The house was quiet, but not the comforting quiet of a safe home. This was the kind of silence that makes every creak, hum, or distant noise feel amplified. He reached for his mug of tea, steaming and warm, and tried to focus on the familiar comfort of the kitchen. That's when he heard it. A faint crunch of gravel outside, deliberate and slow. His stomach tightened. He froze, listening intently, straining to hear more. He could tell the sound was coming from the yard. Footsteps, pacing, stopping, then moving again. No wind or animal made a pattern like that. Alex swallowed hard and whispered to himself, "It's probably nothing. Maybe the neighbor." But he knew deep down that the sound didn't match any neighbor schedule, and he had no neighbor close enough for that. A cold sweat ran down his back as he realized someone was outside, deliberately moving around the house. He slowly moved toward the window, careful not to make noise, trying to peek through the curtains. The shadows outside flickered and shifted in ways that didn't align with the natural sway of the trees. His hands trembled slightly as he clutched the edge of the curtain. The footsteps stopped suddenly. The quiet returned, heavy and almost tangible, like the night itself was holding its breath. Alex's mind raced through possibilities. A prowler? Someone lost? Or something worse? He knew it wasn't the wind, wasn't a stray animal, wasn't a normal night. By the time he settled back, gripping the blanket around his shoulders, Alex realized the ordinary safety of his home was gone. That small, almost imperceptible disturbance had broken the illusion. Something, or someone, was out there, testing him, watching, waiting. Alex spent the next few hours on edge. Every time he dared to glance outside, shadows seemed darker, deeper, moving in ways the wind couldn't explain. Leaves rustled in odd patterns, scraping against the siding, and the faint outline of something, a figure, maybe, seemed to vanish when he focused on it. He tried rationalizing, talking to himself in quiet mutters. "It's just the wind. It's nothing. Calm down." But each sound, each flicker, contradicted the words. He could feel his heart pounding, a low, steady drum of alertness in his chest. The porch light flickered once, then again. Alex's eyes widened as the shadow of a figure seemed to stretch along the siding. He froze, holding his breath, debating whether to call someone or just wait. The fear of confirming the presence kept him frozen, a common paralysis in moments like these. Even as he hugged the blanket around his shoulders, Alex's mind raced. He tried to distract himself with the muted TV, but every flicker of light seemed to sync with movement outside. The ordinary safety of his home was eroding, replaced by the realization that someone or something was deliberately present just beyond the window pane. By nightfall, Alex kept the curtains tightly closed, his senses straining for any hint of movement. Each small sound now carried weight: the wind, the trees, a distant car, or footsteps in the gravel. The ordinary world had shifted, and he was keenly aware that his home was no longer fully his own. Later that evening, Alex decided to check the porch before settling in completely for the night. He noticed something odd. The small, potted plant by the door was slightly tilted, though he was certain he had left it straight that morning. His stomach knotted as he crouched to inspect it, brushing off the thought that he might just be imagining things. But the displacement was real. He glanced around the yard, heart racing. Everything else seemed normal. The chairs, the rake against the wall. But that small movement felt deliberate, intentional. He whispered under his breath, "No one could have just... No, I was home all day." The thought of someone moving the plant while he was inside sent a chill crawling up his spine. Alex went back inside and triple-checked the doors and windows. Everything was locked exactly as it should be. Still, the sense of intrusion lingered, like a shadow pressing against the safety of the home. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the siding now felt like an announcement that someone was there, just out of sight. He tried to rationalize. Maybe he had brushed it without noticing, maybe a small animal. But deep down he knew that the movement didn't fit any ordinary explanation. The plant, a mundane object, had become proof that the ordinary boundaries of his home were being tested. Alex spent the next hour pacing the living room, blanket wrapped tightly around him, listening for the faintest hint of activity outside. Every sound, every shadow, seemed magnified, and the tension wound tighter with each passing moment. Even the muted TV flicker felt like a small signal against the darkness. By bedtime, he could no longer ignore the creeping anxiety. Something was outside, subtle but deliberate, and Alex realized the ordinary safety he had taken for granted was gone. He couldn't see the figure yet, but its presence was undeniable. As the night grew deeper, Alex sat on the couch trying to focus on his phone. But it was impossible. His eyes kept drifting to the windows, every shadow magnified in his mind. The sense of being watched was strong, almost tangible, pressing in from outside the glass. He hugged his blanket tighter, the fabric a thin but comforting barrier between him and the unknown. Faint noises punctuated the stillness, a scraping of gravel, the creak of a branch, the soft whistle of wind. But some sounds didn't fit. They were irregular, deliberate, almost conversational, as if someone or something was moving with intent. His pulse quickened, his breathing shallow. The ordinary hum of the refrigerator and the muted TV became background noise in a room filled with subtle menace. Alex debated calling someone, a friend, or even the police, but part of him was frozen by the fear of confirming the presence outside. He knew that looking out the window, even briefly, could be dangerous. He might catch a glimpse of the intruder, and then what? The uncertainty itself was more terrifying than any confirmation. He tried talking quietly to himself, muttering, "It's just the wind. It's nothing. Calm down." But his own words rang hollow. Every instinct screamed that he was not imagining it. The deliberate shifting, the tiny disturbances, the irregular sounds. They all pointed to the presence of someone outside. Hours passed, with Alex sitting tensely on the couch, eyes flicking to the curtains, ears straining for the smallest sound. He could no longer sleep, no longer relax. His home, once a place of safety, had become a stage for subtle terror. The ordinary transformed into a shadowed, unpredictable world. By the end of the night, Alex realized something important. The intruder wasn't acting randomly. They were testing, observing, and biding their time. The quiet house felt like a trap, and he understood that the events of this night were only the beginning. Alex woke to the dull glow of morning light filtering through the curtains, but sleep had been scarce. Every creak of the house and rustle from outside haunted his dreams. As he moved toward the kitchen, he noticed something immediately: faint footprints in the gravel leading to the porch. His stomach dropped. He knew he hadn't stepped outside in the dark, and there was no sign of a neighbor. He crouched to inspect the footprints more closely. They were small but deliberate, spaced evenly as if someone had been pacing. The impressions were fresh. The gravel had been shifted recently. Alex felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. His hands trembled slightly as he reached out, touching the edge of one print, trying to ground himself in reality. He considered calling the police, but the thought made him hesitate. Would they believe him? How could he explain faint, isolated footprints without any sighting of the person? Instead, he stepped back, heart pounding, and retraced the steps in his mind, trying to recall if he had accidentally stepped outside. But he knew he hadn't. Alex's gaze swept the yard. Everything else looked normal. The plants, the porch, the fence. But the presence of those footprints made the ordinary yard feel invaded, like someone had been quietly observing him. He couldn't shake the sense that the intruder was still out there, watching, waiting for the next opportunity. He spent the morning on edge, pacing the living room, glancing repeatedly at the windows. Every small sound, a falling leaf, a creak in the siding, felt deliberate, like a warning. Even the humming of the refrigerator seemed louder, more intrusive, as though the house itself had become a vessel for tension. By midday, Alex realized he could no longer dismiss the signs. The footprints confirmed his growing fear. He was being watched, and the ordinary boundaries of his home were already being tested. As evening approached, Alex tried to relax by turning on the TV and making a cup of tea. But the lights in the house started flickering intermittently, not in the pattern of a loose bulb or electrical surge, more like someone tapping a switch at random intervals. His heart raced, and a cold chill ran through him. He moved from room to room, checking the circuit breaker and inspecting the bulbs. Everything was fine. Yet the flickering continued, subtle, almost imperceptible, but deliberate enough to make him jump each time it happened. The house felt alive with something unseen, testing his nerves. Alex paused in the living room, noticing the shadows from the flickering light stretched long and distorted across the walls. It was uncanny how ordinary objects, the bookshelf, the coffee table, the couch, seemed to shift and move in the dim light, their forms almost menacing. Even the blanket around his shoulders couldn't provide the same comfort it had before. He whispered under his breath, "It's just electricity, it's nothing." But deep down, he knew the pattern of flickers wasn't random. The timing, the intensity, it all felt orchestrated, as if someone was trying to unsettle him before he even realized what they were doing. Every time he glanced at the windows, he thought he saw fleeting silhouettes or hints of movement beyond the curtains. The ordinary safety of his home was slipping, replaced by the creeping knowledge that someone, or something, was deliberately present, and the night would only become stranger. By bedtime, Alex left a lamp on in the corner of the living room, but even that didn't erase the feeling that he was being watched, every flicker a reminder that the ordinary could no longer be trusted. Alex awoke in the middle of the night to a faint creak. At first, he thought it was the house settling, but then he noticed something unusual. The door to the pantry was slightly ajar, though he was sure he had closed it. His heart started hammering. He tiptoed over and nudged the door. It didn't swing shut easily, as if it had been pushed recently. He checked the locks and other doors around the house. Everything else was secure. But the pantry door was a subtle reminder that someone had been inside the perimeter of his home. He hugged his blanket tighter, feeling the fragile barrier between him and the outside world. The ordinary safety he relied on had already been breached, in small, almost invisible ways. Alex's mind raced with possibilities. Could it be a burglar, a prankster, or something worse, something patient, testing the boundaries of his attention and fear? The rational side tried to reason maybe he had left it slightly open without noticing, but instinct screamed that it was deliberate. He spent the rest of the night in the living room, blanket wrapped tight, listening to every sound, the wind, branches scraping the siding, the faint hum of appliances. Each noise felt magnified, like a deliberate signal. Every shadow flickering across the room seemed alive, waiting for him to notice. By morning, Alex was exhausted but hyper-aware. Even mundane tasks, making coffee, washing dishes, carried a subtle tension. The ordinary world felt fragile, infiltrated by an unseen presence. Later that morning, Alex discovered something new. A small scrap of paper had been slid under the door. At first, he thought it was a flyer or a delivery notice, but when he picked it up, there was nothing written on it, just a folded square of plain white paper. A shiver ran down his spine. Who would do this? How did it get there without him noticing anyone outside? He examined the yard and windows, looking for footprints or signs of entry. Nothing else appeared disturbed, but the note was enough to unsettle him completely. It confirmed what he already feared. Someone was observing him, aware of his movements, and leaving subtle messages. Alex felt the panic rising, but he tried to steady his breathing. He reminded himself of logic, of the mundane explanations, but none fit. The paper, the shadows, the doors, the flickering lights, all signs pointed to a deliberate, unseen presence. He spent the rest of the day on high alert, glancing at the windows and doors constantly. Even a bird landing on the porch seemed to trigger a heightened state of fear. By evening, the ordinary comfort of home had vanished entirely. Alex realized that day 3 had changed everything. The disturbances were no longer subtle background noise. They were a form of communication, a test, a game he hadn't agreed to play. And he knew the next days would only escalate. Alex was barely sleeping anymore. Every creak, rustle, and sigh of the house jolted him awake. Around 2 a.m., he heard it. Soft, deliberate footsteps on the gravel outside. Not random, not the wind. Someone was pacing, stopping, and moving again, as if testing his reaction. He froze on the couch, blanket clutched tightly around his shoulders. The muted TV flickered in the background, but it no longer provided comfort. It felt intrusive, a weak light against the darkness beyond the curtains. Alex strained to listen, catching the faint scrape of shoes against gravel, the subtle sway of branches brushing the siding. He whispered under his breath, "It's just outside. It's not inside. It's not real." But the tension in his chest betrayed him. His pulse raced as every sound outside seemed amplified, deliberate, almost conversational. Every step, every shift of shadow felt like a signal he wasn't supposed to miss. Alex got up slowly, careful not to make a sound. He peered through a small gap in the curtain. For a fleeting moment he thought he saw a silhouette just beyond the porch light, tall, still, almost blending with the dark. Then it was gone. The wind, the night, the trees, everything returned to normal, almost as if nothing had happened. He sat back down, trembling, trying to calm his racing thoughts. But the ordinary comfort of his home had slipped further away. The footsteps were real, and he knew they had a purpose. Someone was there, lingering, and testing him in the dead of night. The next morning, Alex discovered something else. A small chair by the window had been shifted slightly, though he was certain he had left it flush against the wall. His heart sank. Whoever, or whatever, had been outside last night might have been inside the perimeter of the house, testing boundaries. He checked all doors and windows again, confirming they were locked. The sense of intrusion lingered like a shadow over his morning routine. Making coffee felt tense. Even mundane tasks like wiping down the counter carried an undercurrent of dread. Every object he passed seemed to carry a story now. A misplaced mug, a crooked picture frame, even tiny, normal household imperfections felt like messages from someone watching. Alex realized his mind was starting to read too much into things, but at the same time, he couldn't ignore the patterns. He spent most of the day pacing, double-checking locks, peering out the windows. Even the wind brushing against the siding or rustling leaves seemed deliberate. Alex's once familiar home was now a theatre for subtle, calculated disturbances, each one sharpening his anxiety. By evening, he knew the intruder's presence had escalated. The ordinary home he had trusted now felt invaded, fragile, and unsafe. That night, Alex couldn't resist peeking through the curtains again. The yard was dark, shadows stretching unnaturally under the porch light. Then he saw it, a tall, dark silhouette standing near the fence, completely still, his breath caught. He froze, unsure if he should reach for his phone or just watch silently. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound, but the deliberate stillness was terrifying. Alex realized that seeing it confirmed what he had feared. This wasn't his imagination. Someone was out there, deliberately observing him. He whispered to himself, trying to remain calm. Maybe they don't know I see them. Maybe it's a neighbor, maybe... But every possibility seemed inadequate. His instincts screamed that this was deliberate, patient, and possibly dangerous. The silhouette shifted slightly, just enough for Alex to feel the weight of being watched. He drew the blanket around himself like armor, though it did little to ease the tension. The ordinary comfort of the home had vanished completely, replaced by a heightened awareness of every sound, every shadow. Finally, the figure melted into the darkness beyond the fence, leaving only the whisper of wind and the rustling of trees. Alex knew he wouldn't sleep tonight, and that the intruder's presence had become real, undeniable, and closer than ever. Later in the night, as Alex sat tense on the couch, he heard something new. A faint, almost imperceptible whisper just beyond the porch door. It wasn't loud enough to make out words, but the sound of a human voice, quiet and deliberate, made his stomach twist. He froze, heart pounding, straining to listen. The voice didn't repeat, didn't move. It was as if it was testing him, watching his reaction, waiting for him to notice. Every hair on his arms stood on end. Alex whispered under his breath, trying to rationalize. "It's the wind. It's the trees. It's nothing." But the logic felt hollow. The sound had come from a precise location, somewhere outside the house near the door, and it wasn't a natural noise. He tiptoed toward the window again, eyes wide, trying to catch a glimpse. Shadows shifted in the dim porch light, and the air felt heavy, as if the night itself was holding him hostage. Alex realized he could no longer ignore the reality. The intruder was active, deliberate, and bold enough to make their presence known in subtle, terrifying ways. By the time he returned to the couch, blanket wrapped tight, he knew this night had changed everything. The ordinary house, once his sanctuary, was now a stage for a slow, invisible, terrifying invasion. Alex woke feeling exhausted, his body tense from sleepless nights. The shadows outside hadn't gone away. If anything, they felt closer. Today, he decided to take action. He checked all the doors and windows multiple times, locking and relocking them, ensuring nothing could slip past unnoticed. He even added extra locks to the back door and placed a chair under the knob just to feel a small sense of control. The mundane objects of his home, the chair, the locks, the simple latch mechanisms, suddenly became weapons in a silent war against the invisible intruder. He paced the living room, mentally mapping every corner of the house. The ordinary comfort of his familiar surroundings had vanished, replaced with a heightened awareness. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the refrigerator now carried weight, as though the house itself was alive and aware of the intruder's presence. Alex checked the windows again, peering through the curtains, straining to catch even the faintest movement outside. He saw nothing, yet every rustle of leaves, every faint scratch on gravel kept his senses on edge. The shadows seemed to shift with purpose, testing his patience, his attention, and his courage. By evening, he had set up small lights along the porch and near the backyard, hoping to catch a glimpse of movement if the intruder returned. It was a small reassurance, a way to reclaim some control, but it did little to calm the constant tension building in his chest. Finally, Alex sank onto the couch, blanket wrapped tightly around him. Every noise, every shadow, felt like a reminder. He was no longer safe in his own home, and the ordinary rules of security had already been broken. That night, Alex decided he couldn't fully sleep. Every night spent alone had taught him that the intruder struck in the quiet hours when vigilance dropped. He set up his phone and a flashlight within arm's reach, ready to react if he heard a sound beyond the window. Minutes stretched like hours. Every subtle noise, a creak, a branch scraping against siding, distant gravel crunching, made his stomach twist. He felt trapped in a world where ordinary silence became a weapon, and every small movement outside became a challenge to his courage. He tried to distract himself with TV and muted music, but even the familiar sounds felt intrusive. The flickering shadows on the walls, cast by the light, seemed to dance with purpose, hinting at the presence just beyond the glass. Alex took to pacing the room, blanket around his shoulders, flashlight in hand. His mind rehearsed scenarios. What if the intruder came inside? What if the shadows outside were more than just observation? Every what if tightened his chest and made his breath shallow. By the middle of the night, he realized he had barely blinked in hours, his eyes trained on the windows. The ordinary rhythm of life, sleep, relaxation, safety, was gone. He was fully awake, fully alert, and fully aware that the intruder had shifted the rules of his home. Alex decided to take it a step further. He placed his phone near the largest window, camera aimed at the yard, hoping to capture any movement while he stayed safely behind the curtains. It felt like a small victory, a way to fight back, even if passively. He sat tense, checking the live feed, watching shadows stretch and flicker. Every movement of leaves, every branch brushing the siding, made his pulse quicken. The camera was both comfort and curse, proof that nothing happened yet, but also a constant reminder of the lurking presence outside. Alex tried to prepare for contingencies. He moved chairs near doors, set small obstacles, and made mental notes of escape routes. Even these small actions felt heroic in the face of the creeping terror outside, and he clung to them like lifelines. The ordinary home he had trusted now felt like a tactical environment. Each corner, each shadow, each sound could mean something or nothing, and the uncertainty was unbearable. By late night, the camera feed showed nothing unusual, yet Alex could feel the invisible eyes on him. The surveillance was just another layer of tension, a way to keep control in a home slowly overtaken by fear. Around midnight, Alex heard a sound he hadn't expected. A soft knock at the back door. It was deliberate, careful, almost casual. He froze, heart racing, blanket clutched to his chest. The knock didn't repeat, but the weight of it settled heavily in the room. He whispered to himself, "Stay calm. Stay calm." But every instinct screamed danger. He peered through a crack in the curtains, flashlight in hand, but saw nothing. The porch was empty, the shadows still and deep, and yet he knew the knock was real, deliberate, and meant for him to notice. Alex backed away from the window, knees shaking. The ordinary sound of a knocking door, usually mundane, now carried a threatening weight. Every muscle in his body tensed, ready for an unseen confrontation. He sat on the couch, trembling, trying to steady his breathing. The room felt smaller, the shadows closer, the tension unbearable. He realized he was no longer just observing the intruder. He was being observed in return. By 2 a.m., Alex was exhausted, trembling, and hyper-alert. He knew sleep was impossible. The ordinary home was now a battlefield of shadows, whispers, and deliberate disturbances. And he understood fully, tonight was only the beginning. Alex hadn't slept well for days. The nights had become an endless cycle of tension, hypervigilance, and tiny disturbances. Tonight, though, something felt different. As he sat on the couch, blanket wrapped around him, he noticed movement beyond the curtains. Subtle, deliberate, unmistakable. He froze, holding his breath, eyes locked on the window. A figure was standing near the porch, perfectly still. Then it shifted slightly, just enough to confirm that this was not a shadow cast by the trees or the wind. His heart raced, muscles tensed, every sense on high alert. He whispered under his breath, "It's real. It's really out there." The reality hit him harder than he had imagined. He could see a dark outline, tall, human-shaped, and patiently waiting. The intruder was no longer just a concept. They were tangible, present, and deliberate. Alex pressed back into the couch, trying to steady his breathing. Every creak of the house, every whisper of wind now carried weight. The ordinary safety of his home had vanished completely, replaced by the tangible fear of someone watching him in the dead of night. For a few moments the figure didn't move. Alex didn't dare blink. Time stretched, heavy and oppressive, as he realized the intruder was fully aware of him just beyond the thin curtain separating them. Finally, the shadow shifted again, stepping back slightly into the darkness, leaving Alex trembling but fully aware. The intruder was real, and the night had become a dangerous game. Minutes later, Alex summoned the courage to peek again. The porch light illuminated the yard just enough to reveal a figure crouching near the fence. His stomach twisted. It felt impossible to breathe normally. The intruder wasn't hiding completely. They were deliberate, almost theatrical in their patience. Alex's mind raced with questions. Was it a neighbor, a criminal, or someone with a more sinister motive? The rational explanations felt thin, hollow. Nothing about the figure's behavior made sense in ordinary terms. This was intentional, patient, and frighteningly confident. He tried to distract himself, whispering quietly, telling himself to breathe slowly. But every movement outside, the faint shuffle, the subtle shift in shadow, felt like a calculated test, gauging his fear, his attention, his awareness. The ordinary comfort of his home had vanished. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the siding now carried a threatening weight. Alex realized the intruder was not only outside, but also controlling the pace, the timing, and the tension, leaving him trapped in uncertainty. Minutes dragged as Alex stared, frozen, realizing that his own home had become a stage for someone else's game. He could not move, could not speak, and could not ignore the presence. The intruder was patient, deliberate, and terrifyingly close. Finally, the figure receded into the shadows, leaving Alex shaken, trembling, and fully aware that this was no longer a game. It was real, and he was now part of it. Later in the night, Alex heard it again. Footsteps, soft but deliberate, pacing the yard in patterns he hadn't noticed before. He pressed himself to the couch, listening, counting, trying to anticipate the intruder's movements. The ordinary rhythm of the house, the hum of the fridge, the flicker of the TV became a symphony of tension, each sound amplified by fear. He whispered under his breath, "I need to stay calm. I need to stay calm." But the words felt useless. The footsteps followed no predictable pattern, stopping suddenly, resuming, circling. It was deliberate, like the intruder was testing his awareness, gauging his fear. Alex realized he had become part of the intruder's observations. Every movement he made, every glance toward the windows, every shallow breath was likely noted, assessed, and played against him. The ordinary rules of privacy and safety were gone, replaced by constant vigilance. He clutched the blanket tighter, flashlight in hand, waiting for the next sign. Every rustle, every faint creak of the siding heightened the terror. He knew the intruder was not just outside, they were actively engaging, slowly breaking the boundaries of safety and comfort. Hours passed like minutes. Alex remained alert, almost paralyzed, caught between fear and disbelief. The ordinary home had been transformed into a cage, with shadows and deliberate sounds serving as invisible walls. By the early hours, Alex decided he couldn't remain passive. He inched to the largest window, flashlight ready, and finally caught a glimpse of the figure in full view. Tall, hooded, standing near the far corner of the yard, motionless, watching. The cold realization struck him. The intruder had been outside all night, deliberately hiding in plain sight, testing his nerves and patience. Alex froze, unsure whether to call someone, confront the intruder, or simply wait. Each option carried a paralyzing fear. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, but its presence was oppressive, confirming everything Alex had feared for the past 5 nights. He whispered under his breath, trying to convince himself it wasn't real, but the sight was undeniable. The intruder was human, deliberate, and terrifyingly patient. The ordinary boundaries of home were gone. Even retreating to the couch didn't bring comfort. Every shadow seemed alive, every creak of the floorboards a deliberate signal. Alex realized that the intruder had escalated from subtle signs to unmistakable presence. By dawn, Alex was exhausted, trembling, and fully aware that sleep, safety, and ordinary comfort were all illusions. The intruder was out there, patient and persistent, and the next night promised even more terror. Alex woke with a knot in his stomach, every muscle tight from the previous night's direct observation. The yard felt different in the morning light. Quieter, almost too quiet. But the unease in his chest told him the intruder hadn't gone anywhere. The ordinary sense of home felt absent, replaced by a constant anticipation of unseen movements. That evening, as dusk settled, Alex noticed shadows shifting unnaturally across the porch. He peeked through the curtains and caught a glimpse of a dark figure lingering near the fence, partially hidden by bushes. Unlike before, the intruder didn't hide completely. This time, the figure seemed to deliberately let itself be seen, testing boundaries, gauging Alex's reaction. Alex froze, heart hammering. He whispered under his breath, "It's real! They're still here! They're waiting!" The rational side of his mind tried to reason. Maybe a neighbor, maybe a prankster. But instinct screamed that this presence was deliberate and dangerous, every small sound amplified. Leaves brushing the siding, the creak of a branch, even distant traffic. The ordinary noises of the night had become threats, each one carrying the weight of someone observing, calculating, and anticipating his every move. Finally, the figure receded into the shadows, leaving Alex shaking, aware that the intruder's confidence was growing. The invisible rules of safety in his home were being rewritten, one deliberate act at a time. Alex spent most of the day on edge, checking the house repeatedly. When he entered the kitchen, he noticed the knife block was slightly rotated and the sugar jar on the counter had been nudged. His stomach sank. The intruder wasn't just outside anymore. The disturbances were becoming more tangible, more invasive. He inspected the rest of the house, trying to find more signs, but everything else seemed untouched. The small changes, though subtle, were enough to make him feel violated. Alex realized that the intruder was escalating, testing not just his nerves, but his awareness of the space around him. He tried to rationalize. Maybe he had accidentally nudged the objects himself in a moment of distraction. But the growing pattern of disturbances, footsteps, shadows, moved objects, made the rational explanations thin and unsatisfying. Alex spent the evening pacing the living room, blanket around his shoulders, flashlight in hand. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside made his chest tighten. He could no longer ignore the reality. The intruder was escalating their activity, becoming bolder and more deliberate. By nightfall, the ordinary comfort of home was gone. Every object, every shadow, every sound now carried potential menace, reminding Alex that he was being watched and tested continuously. Late that night, Alex heard it again, footsteps circling the yard. This time, they were louder, deliberate, closer. He pressed himself against the couch, heart racing, ears straining to track the pattern. Unlike previous nights, the intruder was now daring, pacing in a way that was meant to be noticed. Alex whispered to himself, trying to calm down. "It's just outside. It's nothing. Stay calm." But his voice trembled, and the fear in his chest tightened with every step beyond the window. The ordinary rhythm of his house, the hum of appliances, the subtle creaks, now carried the weight of unseen intent. He watched the shadows shift with purpose. Every rustle, every scrape of gravel seemed intentional, like the intruder was not only outside, but taunting him, drawing him into a heightened state of vigilance. Alex realized he had become part of a game, one he hadn't agreed to play. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. He remained frozen, blanket clutched tight, flashlight ready. The ordinary night had become a stage for the intruder's deliberate presence. Each footstep was a reminder that Alex was being watched, tested, and possibly prepared for something more sinister. By dawn, Alex was exhausted but fully aware. The intruder was no longer subtle. The presence was active, deliberate, and unrelenting. Around 2 a.m., Alex heard it, a soft thud against the side of the house, close to the back door. His heart leapt into his throat. He crept to the window, peering through the curtain, flashlight ready. The porch was empty, or so it seemed at first glance. Then he saw it, a shadow moving deliberately, crouching low near the far corner of the yard. The intruder had come closer than ever before, testing boundaries. Alex froze, pulse pounding, unsure whether to shout, call someone, or just stay still. Every instinct screamed danger. He whispered to himself, trying to rationalize. "They're outside! They can't come in!" But the proximity of the figure shattered any lingering sense of safety. Alex felt the ordinary barriers of his home, locks, doors, curtains, were paper thin against a patient, calculating intruder. The figure remained motionless for several minutes, then retreated slowly into the shadows. The moment was brief, yet it confirmed everything Alex feared. The intruder was bold, aware, and deliberately escalating. By sunrise, Alex was trembling, exhausted, and acutely aware that the nights ahead would only grow more dangerous. The ordinary world of home and safety had been replaced with a slow-burning, invisible threat. Alex woke in the early hours, a tight knot of dread in his stomach. The nights had become unbearable, filled with footsteps, shadows, and deliberate disturbances. Today, however, something felt different. The back door, which he was certain he had locked before bed, was slightly ajar. His pulse skyrocketed as he approached it slowly, careful not to make noise. The lock was intact, but the door had clearly been nudged. Alex's hands trembled as he pushed it shut and checked every other entry point in the house. Nothing else was disturbed, but the message was clear. The intruder had been closer than ever before. He tried to rationalize. Maybe he had forgotten? No, his memory of locking the door was vivid. The deliberate nature of the intrusion left no room for doubt. Alex felt a cold wave of fear wash over him. The ordinary safety of his home had been shattered. He double-checked the windows, reinforced the locks, and even wedged a chair under the back doorknob. Small measures, but they offered a semblance of control. Still, the lingering sense of violation gnawed at him relentlessly. Alex moved cautiously through the house, flashlight in hand, scanning corners and shadows. The once comforting familiarity of his home had become a landscape of potential threats, and every step carried the weight of anticipation and dread. By the time dawn broke, Alex knew his home was no longer a sanctuary. It was a stage for a patient, bold intruder who had crossed the threshold of subtle intimidation into deliberate boundary testing. Later that night, Alex sat tense in the living room, peering through the curtains. The yard was quiet, but a sudden reflection caught his eye. The window by the kitchen was slightly streaked, as if someone had pressed their hand against the glass. He swallowed hard, feeling bile rise in his throat. The mark wasn't smudged from inside, it was fresh, deliberate. Alex pressed his hand against the glass, then stepped back, heart hammering. The intruder had been here, close enough to touch the house without entering. He checked the yard, but there was no sign of footprints near the window. It was as if the intruder had appeared and vanished in the blink of an eye, testing the boundaries of fear. Every ordinary noise, the hum of the fridge, distant traffic, wind through the trees, now carried menace. Alex sat on the couch, shivering, wrapped tightly in his blanket. The ordinary home, once a place of safety, was now a stage for deliberate psychological pressure. He realized that the intruder's tactics were escalating, moving from observation to direct engagement. He spent the rest of the night scanning shadows, every creak of the floor and rustle of leaves setting him on edge. The invisible presence felt more tangible than ever. By morning, Alex knew he could no longer ignore the signs. The intruder wasn't just outside. They were actively testing how close they could get without crossing the line completely. The next day, Alex discovered that a small stack of books on the living room shelf had been shifted slightly, not enough to knock anything over, but deliberate enough to notice. His stomach sank. The intruder was no longer content with lurking outside. They were leaving their mark inside, testing boundaries further. He examined the rest of the house carefully. Nothing else appeared disturbed, but the moved books were a message. Someone was inside his mental space now, intruding into the familiar and ordinary. Alex felt the walls closing in, the safe zones shrinking with every subtle act of invasion. He tried to rationalize, but the pattern was undeniable. Footsteps, shadows, slightly moved objects, doors left ajar, each act escalating in boldness. His home was no longer a sanctuary. It had become a playground for the intruder's patience and manipulation. Alex spent the evening reinforcing everything he could, locks, window latches, even rearranging furniture to block access points. It was a small comfort, a psychological fight against the invisible threat, but the tension never left his chest. By nightfall, he sat on the couch, flashlight in hand, heart hammering. Every sound, the wind, a branch scraping, the distant call of an owl, felt like a deliberate intrusion. The ordinary rhythm of home had been shattered, replaced with relentless, calculated terror. Around midnight, Alex heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible whisper outside, near the porch. He froze, heart pounding, recognizing a human quality in the sound. Unlike before, it seemed directed at him. The intruder was no longer hiding behind shadows. They were actively interacting. He whispered under his breath, trying to convince himself it was imagination, but instinct screamed otherwise. The whisper had weight, intention, and presence. The ordinary night had become a dialogue between him and the unseen, and he was losing. Alex crept to the window, peering through a crack in the curtain. The yard appeared empty, but the intensity of the presence was palpable. He could feel the gaze, deliberate and focused, as if the intruder was aware of his every thought and movement. He retreated to the couch, trembling, realizing that the escalation was deliberate. The intruder was pushing boundaries further every night, and Alex had no choice but to remain vigilant. Every shadow, every sound, every subtle movement outside was now a threat. By the end of day 8, Alex knew the intruder had crossed the line from observation into psychological warfare. The ordinary home he had trusted was now an arena of deliberate fear, and the nights promised even greater challenges. Alex was exhausted from sleepless nights, but tonight felt different. The usual yard disturbances escalated. Louder, deliberate, unnervingly close. Around 1 a.m. he froze as he heard something unmistakable. Footsteps on the porch, then a soft thud inside the house near the back door. His heart raced, breath caught in his chest. The locks were secure, but the sound was undeniable. Someone had crossed the invisible line. Alex crept cautiously toward the source, flashlight in hand, mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Every ordinary object, the couch, chairs, counters, felt like a shield, a fragile barrier between him and the intruder. His pulse thundered in his ears as he strained to hear any further movement, each creak of the floor now magnified into a threat. The footsteps stopped suddenly, replaced by a tense silence that pressed on his chest. Alex whispered under his breath, "Stay calm, don't panic, just see." Every instinct screamed danger, but curiosity and fear pinned him in place. Minutes passed, the quiet almost unbearable. Then a soft scrape from the hallway confirmed his worst fears. The intruder was inside the perimeter, moving deliberately, testing boundaries, asserting presence. Alex realized the game had changed. The intruder was no longer outside, observing from a distance. They were inside his mental space, fully aware, fully patient, and fully terrifying. Alex cautiously peered into the hallway, flashlight sweeping slowly. A shadow moved at the far end, tall and hooded, almost blending with the darkness. His stomach twisted. He could make out the silhouette's posture. Deliberate, slow, confident. The intruder didn't rush. Instead, they lingered, pausing as if aware Alex was watching, testing him. Every second stretched unbearably long, every shadow in the dim light becoming a potential threat. Alex felt trapped, though he hadn't moved from the living room. He whispered under his breath, trying to steady his racing thoughts. "It's real. It's really happening." Rational thought offered no comfort. The intruder was deliberate, patient, and almost theatrical in their control of the space. Alex's flashlight caught a faint glimmer. A hood, the edge of a coat, movement calculated to intimidate. The ordinary safety of home had vanished completely. Every inch of familiar space was now a theater for the intruder's psychological manipulation. He backed away slowly, careful not to make noise, trying to preserve both his physical safety and composure. Each step was calculated, each breath measured. The ordinary house had become a battlefield. By the time the shadow receded into the far hallway, Alex's hands shook, body tense, and mind racing with terror. He realized this was no longer a subtle test. The intruder was fully aware of him, and the escalation had reached its peak. Around 2 a.m., Alex heard it, a low, deliberate whisper just beyond the door to the living room. Words weren't clear, but the tone was unmistakable, deliberate, patient, and threatening. The intruder had escalated from presence to communication, invading the mind as much as the home. Alex pressed himself into the couch, blanket wrapped tightly, flashlight trembling in his hands. Every sound, the scrape of the floorboards, the hum of appliances, felt magnified, charged with menace. The ordinary world of sleep and safety had been shattered. He tried to rationalize. It's the wind, it's nothing. But instinct screamed otherwise. The whisper had weight, intention, and focus. He was being tested, taunted, and observed, fully, intimately, and deliberately. Alex's mind raced with possibilities. Could he confront the intruder, call for help, escape? Every option carried terrifying risk. The ordinary rules of home and personal safety were gone. By the end of the whisper, Alex was trembling, heart pounding, mind acutely aware that the intruder had escalated beyond observation into direct psychological assault. Minutes later, Alex caught movement near the back porch. The intruder had come close again, close enough that Alex could make out a faint silhouette against the dim porch light. The proximity was terrifying, closer than ever before. Alex froze, body tense, heart hammering, unsure whether to confront or retreat. Every instinct screamed danger, yet he remained rooted in place, watching the deliberate movements of someone fully aware of his fear. He realized the ordinary barriers, doors, locks, windows, were almost irrelevant against such a patient intruder. The home he had relied on for safety had become a stage for psychological warfare. The figure lingered, shifting slightly, then melted back into the shadows, leaving Alex trembling. The encounter confirmed the intruder's boldness. They were no longer just observing or testing. They were interacting, calculating, and escalating fear deliberately. By dawn, Alex was exhausted, every muscle tight, mind racing with dread. Day 9 had crossed the line from subtle invasion into direct confrontation, and he understood that the final days would determine the outcome of this terrifying ordeal. Alex knew tonight would be different. Sleep had been impossible for the past 9 days, and the intruder had escalated from subtle disturbances to direct confrontation. The ordinary home he had once trusted was gone, replaced with shadows, whispers, and the constant feeling of being watched. He paced the living room, blanket wrapped tight, flashlight in hand. Every creak of the floor, every whisper of the wind made his heart race. He checked every lock, reinforced every door and window, and mentally rehearsed how he would react if the intruder approached. As darkness fell, the tension became almost unbearable. The yard seemed alive with shadows, stretching unnaturally under the dim porch light. Every rustle of leaves felt deliberate, every distant noise a calculated taunt. Alex felt trapped in a theater of fear, the intruder fully aware of his vigilance. Minutes dragged into hours. Alex's mind replayed the events of the past 9 nights, each escalating encounter now culminating in this final stretch. He knew the intruder would appear, and he prepared himself, physically and mentally, for the confrontation. Then he heard it. A deliberate, slow footstep on the porch. His breath caught. The intruder had arrived. The final night of the ordeal had begun. Alex cautiously approached the window, flashlight aimed, heart pounding. There it was. The intruder, standing near the fence, tall, hooded, patient. But tonight, the figure moved closer, deliberately entering the pool of dim porch light. The intruder paused as if acknowledging Alex's presence, testing his fear. Alex's pulse raced, muscles tensed, and every instinct screamed danger. The ordinary boundaries of home and personal safety had evaporated. He whispered under his breath, trying to steady his nerves. Stay calm, think, don't panic. But the intruder's deliberate gaze seemed to pierce the curtains, aware of his every thought, every heartbeat. Minutes passed like hours. The intruder's slow, deliberate movements created a tension so thick it was almost physical. Alex realized that the unseen, patient manipulator of the past nights was now fully present, bold and unrelenting. Finally, the intruder receded into the shadows, leaving Alex trembling but fully aware. This encounter had been the peak of the psychological torment, a culmination of days of fear and vigilance. After the direct confrontation, Alex noticed subtle changes. The back door and windows remained untouched, shadows no longer lingered near the porch, and the house fell into a tense silence. The intruder's presence, once relentless, seemed to retreat, though the memory lingered like a weight in the chest. Alex spent the night alert, but gradually the sounds of the house and yard returned to ordinary proportions. The fridge humming, wind rustling leaves, the distant barking of a dog. It was a fragile peace, but peace nonetheless. He cautiously inspected every corner of the house, flashlight in hand, noting that nothing appeared disturbed. The intruder had escalated to the peak, interacted directly, and then withdrawn without a trace. Alex realized that the game had ended, at least for now. The ordinary rhythm of home slowly returned, though Alex's nerves remained frayed. Every shadow, every creak, every whisper in the wind would carry the memory of the past 10 nights. By dawn, Alex allowed himself a tentative breath of relief. The intruder was gone, the climax had passed, but the fear, the tension, and the memories of deliberate, patient torment would linger indefinitely. In the morning, sunlight filled the rooms, offering warmth and clarity. Alex walked through the house, checking locks, windows, and corners one last time. Everything appeared ordinary, yet he couldn't shake the sense of being watched. The ordinary comfort of home was not fully restored. The intruder had left an invisible mark, a psychological footprint that lingered long after their physical presence had vanished. Alex realized he would never look at shadows, sounds, or the quiet of the night the same way again. He sat on the couch, finally allowing himself to relax slightly, reflecting on the past 10 days. The intruder's methodical, patient terror had pushed him to the edge, teaching him the fragile nature of safety and the terrifying presence of deliberate fear. Though the intruder had vanished, Alex knew the experience would echo in his mind for years. The ordinary world felt smaller, more vulnerable, and infinitely more dangerous in subtle, invisible ways. By evening, Alex accepted that the ordeal was over. The climax had passed. But the story of 10 nights of relentless, patient, and terrifying intrusion would remain with him forever. Alex woke to sunlight streaming through the windows. The house felt ordinary, quiet, almost peaceful. Yet his body remained tense, every muscle wound tight from the past 10 nights. The ordinary sounds of the neighborhood, birds, distant traffic, felt almost alien after so many nights of hypervigilance. He walked through the rooms carefully, checking locks, doors, and windows. Everything appeared undisturbed, yet he couldn't shake the nagging suspicion that he was being watched. The ordinary comfort of home had not fully returned. Alex tried to convince himself it was over. Perhaps the intruder had given up, had moved on. Yet every creak of the floor, every whisper of wind felt amplified. He realized that the psychological footprint left behind would linger far longer than the physical presence. By evening, Alex allowed himself small, cautious steps toward normalcy, cooking dinner, turning on music, attempting to watch TV. The tension never fully lifted, but he forced himself to engage in ordinary routines. Even as he drifted into a light sleep, he remained alert, half expecting shadows to creep across the room, half expecting the intruder to return. That night, Alex noticed a small detail. The kitchen window latch slightly misaligned. His stomach tightened. It could have been a shift in the frame or his own oversight. But after 10 nights of escalation, every small anomaly triggered fear. He meticulously checked every possible entry point, double and triple locking doors. The ordinary actions of home maintenance had transformed into acts of defense, rituals to reclaim a sense of control. The quiet of the night felt heavy, loaded with memory. Every rustle outside reminded him of footsteps. Every shadow recalled the lurking presence. Alex realized that the intruder's impact was not just physical, but psychological, leaving him hypervigilant and uncertain. By midnight, Alex attempted to relax in the living room, flashlight by his side, alert but trying to reclaim a sense of normalcy. Even small sounds, the hum of appliances, wind brushing the siding, now carried layered meanings. Though nothing overt happened, Alex's mind was on edge. The ordinary rhythms of home had been permanently altered. Over the next few hours, Alex walked through the house at a deliberate pace, testing his courage. He opened closets, checked under furniture, inspected every corner. Each ordinary act was now a subtle test against lingering fear. He noticed nothing unusual, yet the tension remained, gnawing at him like a persistent shadow. Alex realized he had been changed. The past 10 nights had left him permanently attuned to threats, real or imagined. His phone buzzed with notifications, breaking the silence. He jumped, heart racing. Ordinary interruptions now triggered fear reflexes, a reminder that the intruder's psychological footprint had altered his perception of reality. Alex tried to write notes about the experiences, documenting every sight, sound, and movement. The act of recording brought small relief, control through observation, but did not fully erase the tension. By dawn, he felt slightly stronger, cautiously reclaiming the ordinary home, but the lingering fear was like an invisible guest he could not evict. Even as Alex attempted to resume ordinary life, subtle reminders of the intruder lingered. A misplaced object here, a shadow there. Every minor anomaly triggered memories of deliberate threats, deliberate observation, and the patient escalation of fear. He knew he had survived the ordeal physically, but psychologically he remained alert, cautious, and haunted. The ordinary rhythms of night were forever altered by 10 days of terror. Alex realized that the intruder had not needed to fully enter his home or confront him violently to leave a lasting mark. The fear, the anticipation, the unseen presence, these were enough. By evening, Alex accepted a fragile truth. The intruder might be gone, but the vigilance, the tension, and the memory of those nights would remain with him indefinitely. The ordinary home was no longer completely safe, yet he began the slow, deliberate process of reclaiming it. Alex woke to sunlight streaming through the windows, the house finally feeling quiet, almost normal. He moved through the kitchen, brewed coffee, and listened to the familiar hum of the appliances. The ordinary sounds, once magnified into potential threats, now seemed slightly comforting. He walked through the living room, inspecting the furniture and counters for any signs of disturbance. Everything appeared undisturbed, yet a subtle tension lingered in the air, a shadow of the past nights. Every ordinary detail seemed charged with memory. A book slightly askew, a curtain brushing the floor, small reminders of the previous intruder. Alex tried to remind himself, "It's over, you're safe." But the phrase felt fragile, a verbal reassurance against lingering fear. Every shadow, every rustle of leaves outside still triggered a reflexive tightening in his chest. Determined to reclaim some sense of normalcy, he made a mental checklist of tasks: clean, organize, reinforce entry points, and reclaim the space that had felt invaded. The ordinary act of tidying now felt like reclaiming territory, a slow assertion of control over his environment. By midday, Alex felt a slight sense of progress. The house no longer felt completely hostile, though every creak and whisper of the wind reminded him of the invisible intruder who had altered his sense of safety. That afternoon, Alex walked through the yard, flashlight in hand despite the daylight. He checked the fence, porch, and backyard corners, inspecting for footprints or other subtle signs. The physical evidence was gone, but the psychological impression lingered like a phantom shadow. He realized that fear had reshaped his perception. The ordinary yard felt surveilled, every tree, bush, and corner carrying the memory of patient observation. Alex shivered at the realization. The intruder's impact was more than physical. It had reshaped how he interacted with space, even in full daylight. Alex decided to take small steps toward reclaiming his confidence, leaving doors unlocked briefly while monitoring, walking through every room without flashlight, and letting ordinary sounds, wind, traffic, birds exist without interpreting them as threats. Though the fear remained, each small act of normal behavior brought tiny relief, a subtle reminder that he could regain agency over his home and mind. By evening, he felt cautiously optimistic. The intruder might have been patient, deliberate, and terrifying, but Alex was slowly reclaiming the ordinary rhythms of life. Night fell, and Alex braced himself for the inevitable tension of darkness. Even with the intruder gone for 2 nights, the routine of hypervigilance persisted. Every shadow, every faint creak of the floor, every distant sound reminded him of the past 10 days. He paced the living room slowly, flashlight in hand, mentally reviewing every corner, every window, every door. The ordinary house felt slightly larger, quieter, but the memory of deliberate observation lingered in every corner. Alex whispered to himself, trying to stay grounded. "It's over. You are safe." Yet, instinct told him to remain alert. He knew the intruder had left no violent trace, yet their psychological footprint remained, lingering in every shadow, every subtle sound. Minutes stretched into hours. Alex forced himself to sit, relax, and watch the ordinary yard. He realized that this reclamation of space was a slow, deliberate process, as much about mind as matter. By the end of the night, Alex had begun to feel a fragile sense of control, though the lingering tension ensured he would remain cautious for some time. As Alex prepared to sleep, he noticed a faint, almost imperceptible mark on the back porch railing, a scratch that hadn't been there before. His heart skipped a beat. Could it be new? Or a leftover, unnoticed mark from before? He checked the perimeter, doors and windows again, flashlight in hand. Nothing else appeared disturbed. The ordinary sense of closure remained elusive, and the memory of the intruder's deliberate patience and escalation was still fresh. Alex lay down, blanket pulled tightly, mind racing. He realized that even though the intruder might be gone, the psychological presence would linger indefinitely. Every small noise, every shadow, every unexplained detail had become a reminder that safety is fragile. By morning, Alex accepted a quiet truth. He had survived, his home remained physically intact, but the tension, hyper-awareness and subtle fear would be part of his life forever. He had reclaimed normalcy, but the past 10 nights had left an indelible mark. Alex woke to the faint chirping of birds, but the peace felt fragile. The house seemed ordinary, yet every creak and groan of the floorboards reminded him of the past nights. Even sunlight couldn't completely erase the shadow of fear that lingered in his chest. He walked through the kitchen and living room, inspecting windows, doors, and counters. Everything appeared untouched, yet a small sense of unease persisted. Ordinary objects now carried memories of deliberate disturbances, and even the air seemed heavy with tension. Alex tried to calm himself with mundane tasks, making breakfast, tidying the living room, and watering plants. Each act was a step toward reclaiming normalcy, yet the faint fear in his gut refused to vanish completely. He paused by the back porch, staring at the railing where faint scratches had appeared days earlier. The ordinary morning light did little to reassure him. He realized that while the intruder might be gone, the psychological effects would remain. By midday, Alex forced himself to focus on ordinary life, but every sound outside, a distant car, wind rustling leaves, kept him alert. The ordinary rhythm of his home had been permanently altered. Later in the afternoon, Alex noticed something unusual. A small object, a pen he remembered leaving on the counter, was slightly moved. His stomach tightened, heart pounding. Was it new? Or a leftover sign he hadn't noticed? He meticulously checked the house. Nothing else seemed disturbed, yet the uncertainty gnawed at him. After 10 nights of careful observation and direct confrontations, even minor anomalies felt charged with menace. Alex tried to rationalize. It's nothing. Probably me. But the experience had reshaped his instincts. Ordinary occurrences now carried hidden weight, the faintest irregularity triggering tension and hypervigilance. He walked slowly through every room, flashlight occasionally in hand, training his senses on every detail. Each step, each sound, each shadow was now filtered through the memory of deliberate intrusion. By evening, Alex felt the lingering paranoia settling into a quiet rhythm. Not panic, but a persistent awareness that the ordinary world could hide extraordinary threats. As night fell, Alex braced for the familiar tension. He turned on lamps, double-checked locks, and ran through mental routines developed over 10 nights of intrusion. Every shadow outside, every faint rustle of leaves carried potential threat. He paced the living room slowly, flashlight in hand, listening for the familiar cadence of footsteps, whispers, or subtle movement. Hours passed, and though nothing overt occurred, the lingering presence felt almost tangible. Alex whispered under his breath, "It's over. But stay aware." The mantra was necessary to calm nerves, though it did little to erase the shadow of vigilance that had become second nature. He glanced at windows, corners, and darkened spaces. The ordinary comfort of home had been reclaimed, but the intruder's psychological footprint remained, leaving him wary, alert, and subtly fearful. By midnight, Alex allowed himself to sit, relax, and watch the ordinary yard. Even in stillness, the memories of the past nights shaped every thought, every movement, and every breath. Alex lay down, blanket pulled tight, and reflected on the ordeal. The intruder was gone, the direct confrontations had ended, and the house remained physically intact. Yet he understood a hard truth. The fear, vigilance, and heightened awareness would never fully disappear. He accepted that the ordinary world of home, shadows, and night could feel threatening, that some experiences leave invisible marks that linger long after the danger has passed. The intruder had left not just physical traces but a permanent psychological impact. Alex closed his eyes, letting the silence wash over him. Though the tension persisted, he felt a fragile sense of control, an understanding that he could live alongside the fear, gradually reclaiming life while honoring the lessons learned. By dawn, Alex resolved to move forward carefully, vigilant yet not paralyzed. The intruder might never return, but the memories would forever shape how he perceived the ordinary world around him. Alex woke to the soft morning light streaming through his windows. The house finally felt calm, almost ordinary. He moved through the rooms with deliberate care, checking windows and doors, but a subtle sense of relief filled him for the first time in 2 weeks. He brewed coffee, opened the blinds, and let sunlight flood every corner. The ordinary sounds of birds, distant traffic, and wind through the trees felt almost comforting. For the first time in days, Alex allowed himself to breathe without a racing heartbeat, shadowing every moment. Walking through the kitchen, he noticed the faint marks, small disturbances and shadows from past nights. Instead of fear, he acknowledged them quietly, reminders of what he had endured and survived. Alex reflected on the past 13 nights, the escalating tension, the subtle threats, the whispered warnings, and the direct confrontations. He realized that he had emerged stronger, more cautious, but resilient. The ordinary home had been reclaimed, slowly but surely. That afternoon, Alex dedicated time to reclaiming the house fully. He rearranged furniture, cleaned every room, and even added small security measures, cameras, motion sensors, and extra locks. These weren't just practical steps, they were rituals of reclaiming control over the space the intruder had invaded. Every ordinary task, sweeping, dusting, cooking, became symbolic acts of restoration. Alex felt the ordinary rhythm of home returning, gradually dissolving the hypervigilance that had dominated his life for nearly 2 weeks. Yet, even in reclaiming normalcy, subtle tension remained. Every creak, every flicker of shadow, every whisper of wind reminded him that vigilance is a part of survival. Alex knew he could never fully let go of the lessons learned, but he was determined not to be consumed by fear. By evening, the house felt like home again. The ordinary comforts, soft lighting, the hum of appliances, a warm cup of tea offered genuine solace. The intruder was gone, or so it seemed, and Alex began to imagine nights without dread. As darkness fell, Alex prepared for bed with cautious optimism. He checked doors, windows, and locks out of habit, but the panic of previous nights had eased into measured awareness. The ordinary world of night had returned, colored by lessons of patience and observation. He sat quietly for a moment, listening to the wind, the distant sounds of traffic, and the soft rustling of leaves. Each ordinary sound carried memory, yet Alex no longer interpreted them as immediate threats. The intruder had taught vigilance without breaking his spirit entirely. Even as he drifted towards sleep, a subtle edge remained. A shadow moved slightly near the porch, a distant flicker in the corner of his vision. He paused, breath held, heartbeat quickening. But when he looked again, nothing was there. The ordinary world had returned, but the memory of 10 nights of tension lingered like a shadow of caution. Alex smiled faintly, realizing that he had survived, reclaimed his home, and regained control. The ordinary rhythm of life was fragile, yes, but resilient. and perhaps that awareness was the true victory. As Alex finally settled under his blanket, he glanced once more at the backyard. Everything appeared calm and untouched, yet the faint scratch on the railing, the shadow that seemed just a little too deliberate, reminded him that some presences cannot be fully erased. He whispered to himself, "It's over. I'm safe. For now." The last words carried both reassurance and a subtle acknowledgement. The intruder might return, or perhaps the memory alone would linger indefinitely. Alex closed his eyes, letting the ordinary sounds of night fill the room. Sleep finally claimed him, though vigilance would always be a quiet companion. He had survived, endured, and reclaimed his life. But the story of 10 nights of deliberate terror would stay with him forever. The ordinary home was restored, yet the invisible marks of fear remained. A haunting reminder that safety can be fragile, patience can be terrifying, and some presences never truly leave. And that's the story of Alex's 10 nights of terror. A reminder that sometimes the scariest things aren't the ones we see, but the ones that linger in the shadows just beyond our vision. If you enjoyed this story, make sure you hit subscribe and tap the bell for more true, creepy tales that will keep you looking over your shoulder. And don't forget to tell me in the comments, have you ever felt like someone was watching you even when no one was there? Share your story with our little community. We love hearing about your real-life encounters with the unknown. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes what you don't see is the scariest of all.